So our last panel today is talking with folks who primarily work in nonprofit, although of course we want to hear about your career path and the other for-profit jobs that you may have had leading up to this and what your career path might look like after it. Hey, there he is. Hey, Bill, so glad you were able to make it. Great. So here are our three panelists. We're going to get started right now. And as before with the other panelists, what I'd like to do is to ask each of you in turn to talk a little bit about your career path from academia to where you are now. If you can just take a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. So Sean, can I ask you to go first?
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me. Thanks for setting this all up. My name's Sean Isamu Johnston. So my background is in linguistics. I got my undergraduate degree from UC Santa Cruz in linguistics, and then I got my master's in forensic linguistics from Hofstra University. I just graduated with my master's last spring, so 2020. And I became interested in plain language during my graduate degree. I'll talk about this more later, but I really bounced around a lot. I was interested in sociolinguistics and theoretical linguistics and corpus linguistics. And I eventually became interested in plain language, and the plain language world kind of sucked me in. I wrote my thesis on plain language and then just kind of accidentally committed to that path. And then I got a job at a Center for Civic Design as a contractor in August of last year. And I was just hired full-time as my role is a civic designer, researcher, and plain language lead.
Awesome. Hey, congratulations on the, the hiring. That's awesome. There's a couple things you mentioned that I want to come back to, but I would like to go around and get other people's talk. So Bill, can you talk about your path?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So Bill Marcellino, I'm a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation. So I do public policy work across a range of areas, some things like health and education, mostly though national defense and national security issues. I came to get a doctorate later in life. So I had a whole prior life as a US Marine Corps enlisted officer. Years later, I'd already had an English degree in undergraduate. I had an English degree for the heck of it, master's. I got my PhD later in life at Carnegie Mellon University, and my PhD is in rhetoric at an English department. However, my coursework looked like corpus linguistics work, sociolinguistics, and field work in ethnography, discourse analysis. And my doctoral dissertation actually was a field ethnography. I lived with U.S. Marines for 7 months and did an ethnography of communication. And anyways, when I graduated, I didn't want to go into the academic world. I ended up going into the public policy research world. So I kind of transitioned from being a rhetoric person and I guess trained as a linguist to a social scientist at RAND. Over.
Great, thank you. And Mackenzie, let's hear about yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Price. I'm Zooming in today from Washington, D.C. I'm a language strategist and messaging and communications consultant for not exclusively nonprofit organizations, but mostly nonprofit organizations. And I've worked both serving nonprofits and inside of nonprofit organizations of various types. So direct service, research, more think tanky, across different parts of my work history. As a linguist, I am an interactional sociolinguist, but I've lived a couple of different linguist lives. So I was a variationist at one point. I also, there's a deep part of my heart that is all about African-American English and thinking about how that's traveled through the Black diaspora across the world. I've done discourse analysis and different types of discourse analysis. My dissertation was both conversation analysis and ethnography of communication in terms of other parts of linguistics that I'm interested in. I think, the most excited about framing and narrative, but of course, I'm really interested in question asking and advice giving as kind of different types of interaction. And I pursue all of those interests in working with nonprofit organizations that have framing and messaging difficulties. So for example, I've been doing a lot of work lately that's around policing and policing reform. And so how can you use framing to think about something like a conversation about police funding an organization, which you might recognize as the defund the police conversation. And you might be wondering if my work is about like, should we call it that or should we call it something else? But there's more to it than that. And some of what we might think of as a conflict about that is a question of framing and how frames work and who they work for. So those are some of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis as a linguist.
It sounds like your work is very intersectional, that it draws together a
Yes.
lot of threads and things that interest you personally.
Yes, things that interest me personally and are an important part of justice in this world.
Yeah, that's awesome. How is it in Washington today? Things okay?
Well, truthfully, I just got here. I was not in DC this week, but the sun is shining, and I just got here.
Okay.
I've been away.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody is well aware of what's been going on. So Sean, just to flip back to you for a moment, could you talk a little bit about your training in forensic linguistics? I'm not sure that the people who are attending know what that is. And I know we have a couple other forensic linguists who are attendees today. So if you could just say a few words about what that was and what the degree entailed.
Sure. So I think while I was doing the graduate degree, it occurred to me that there are kind of two ways of looking at forensic linguistics. I think the more traditional and narrower way to define it is like looking at language as evidence. So anytime when there are like confessions in a case, or anytime where like language needs to be analyzed in the context of a criminal case. But then more recently, I think that the definition has expanded to mean any time that like language and law intersect. And I was more interested in that version of forensic linguistics. So during my graduate degree, I became interested in this branch of law and linguistics that used corpus linguistics to try to get at the heart of this question of what is like the ordinary meaning of laws. So using corpora to shed light on the question of what is the, on using it to like do statutory interpretation basically. But beside that, I think I became interested in plain language because there are a lot of interesting legal implications behind it. And I started to look at plain language as like a social justice issue. And I came across a lot of interesting literature that made me realize that by not using plain language, you're often excluding people from participating in government or participating in civic institutions. So my journey started by trying to find a connection between like my interests in social justice, but then also my interests in linguistics, and then going in through a forensic linguistics program, and then coming out of it, it kind of came full circle for me.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, cool. Bill, the work that you do at RAND, does that cross over with what Sean was just describing a bit?
A little bit, although it's interesting, you know, for me, linguistic forensics is about linguistic matching to get machines to identify or to have a machine statistically or through machine learning identify either documents or authors. So for example, we do a lot of work where we build machine learning models or use something like confirmatory factor analysis to actually say like, hey, who's posting these things? You know, or teaching my students, for example, like one of my students had a great project recently where they did a linguistic forensics analysis of QAnon, the QAnon author, and was able to show really, really large variation between different movements of QAnon to different boards that suggest pretty strongly it's a different author, or someone with extraordinary control over lexical, stylistic elements, which are really hard to control. Like it's pretty easy to do topics, It's
Mhm.
harder to do something like, stylistics. Anyways, so yeah, I think, that's your question, Laurel?
Yeah, no, that was great. And I was going to ask you to just elaborate a little bit on what you do day to day in your job. It sounds like it's a lot of corpus analysis.
Yeah, so I am the product owner for RandLex. So I realized quickly at Rand that I was a bottleneck for labor. I was the only, I mean, linguist in Washington, D.C. means you speak like Farsi or Russian. So I was the only linguist at Rand. And so anything involving linguistic analysis, anything at scale using machines, even like discourse analysis, I was the only person to do it. So I've spent the last 6 or 7 years building a large scale, like a scalable analytics platform. So we've got like lexical level tests like keenness and colloquy, word and context kind of stuff. So a lot of standard corpus analysis tests. Um, Also stylistic stuff as well to identify like authors, genre, that kind of stuff. And then also machine learning and to make it usable. So like web-based, like anyone here could use this software because it's sort of scaffolded and built in. You just have sort of like general scientific knowledge or general researcher, you could use it. So that's a big part of it, is democratizing um, scalable language analytics. The other part is and this is maybe key for you all here in the audience. No one knows what discourse analysis is. Like when I walked into Rand, I'm like, I like to do some discourse analysis, please. They're like, what are you talking about? I sound like an idiot because I was not speaking their language. But when I said I want to do qualitative content analysis, everyone understood that. And like the fine point of like the hows and whys of discourse analysis versus the kind of what of content analysis, that's a fine point. So I guess what I'm getting at is that if you're able to translate some of the things that we do in linguistics that are specialized to the disciplinary language and find the correlates in general social science or in marketing or wherever that line up with that, so you can authentically do it, that it's credible, I can actually do this, that's a huge benefit. So the other chunk of my work is acting as a content or collecting qualitative data and then doing a variety of analytic methods, many of which look like linguistic methods. Over.
Okay. Mackenzie, can you talk a little bit too about issue which has come up many times today about the need to translate your linguistic skills into whatever people who aren't linguists can understand, right? Like saying discourse analysis, people don't get it. So you have to frame it as a different way. How do you do that in your job?
A lot of my day-to-day sounds similar to Bill's day-to-day, and also a point that I think was made in the last panel, which is uh, thinking about power and how and kind of the presentation of self, and also where interactions might be going off track. I do a lot of that, but to get to the core part of your question, how do you do that translation activity? So part of it is thinking about, at least for me, what you don't have to translate everything, frankly. So what are the things that you do need to translate in order to kind of get to the next step? And sometimes that's why this matters. So you're making a case for your work. Sometimes it's process. Sometimes it's about, here's why I need this specific tool in order to do this content analysis. So making those kinds of cases. And I think that I also draw on, my background in doing a lot of graduate level teaching, right? In terms of the explanation, or even kind of drawing connections between different parts of a project. I draw on that background a lot too in my day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think that's something that people undervalue in themselves. Just generally speaking, across these three panels, all of us have had some teaching experience, I think, given our graduate school background. And that kind of experience is invaluable when it comes to presenting the work that we've done. And just what you were saying, Mackenzie, like drawing things together, explaining to people why something is important. And I know for me personally, I didn't think that was important when I started to work in industry. It was like, oh, I taught that has nothing to do with business, but it is so important to be able to stand up in front of a group with confidence and say, here's why this matters, and here are the things that you need to understand. So for all of the students who are attending, that's important that you can do that. And if you can do it in the context of a linguistics class, you can do it in the context of business as well. So put that up there as something that you know how to do. That's very, very important. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about how you guys found your jobs. So we can start again. So Sean, this job that you have now, you were saying you'd bounced around a lot and then you landed here. We've been hearing so often today that the way you get your jobs is through networking. So was it networking that got you into this job? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there was a conference at my university, or when I was doing my graduate degree. It was hosted by the law school at Hofstra, and it was a plain language for lawyers conference. So it was like mostly a way of like teaching lawyers how to use plain language and judges, and just a way of, it was primarily directed at lawyers. But I went anyway because I had free time, and I met a New York State Supreme Court justice there. And I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I really didn't know what plain language was, but I knew that I was interested in it, maybe like subconsciously, like even what I like to read in my free time, I tended to like simpler writing. So anyway, I met New York State Supreme Court Justice Lucy Billings there, and she basically offered me an internship on the spot. It was unpaid, but from there she introduced me to another judge, Judge Edwina Mendelson, also part of the New York State court system. And I worked for one of her offices called the Office for Justice Initiatives, and basically help them use plain language in everything from like jury instructions and judicial opinions, web content, even like internal emails and like memoranda and stuff, like these long emails, like FAQs that they had received. So that was definitely my foot in the door. And I kind of realized then that like this was probably worth pursuing. But I was still really ambivalent. I didn't really know if that was gonna, like provide me with like any job opportunities. So I kind of committed to it, but I had one foot in and one foot out. And then eventually it was clear that that was a path for me.
Yeah, cool. Bill, what about you?
So both networking and me choosing to go out and compete for an internship for, a fellowship actually. So I went to RAND and applied for their summer associate program, which is a really cool paid fellowship. You work on projects in the summertime. You have to find a mentor and you have to work on projects. And so I did it actually 2 summers in a row, which is kind of unusual. I got to work on a range of national defense projects, suicide prevention for the military, behavioral health kind of stuff, really cool things. I got to use a lot of discourse analysis, corpus linguistics on a large range of OnBari interviews to make sense of a really, really large transcript set, that kind of stuff. And so that eventually led to my job at RAND. But then there was also a networking aspect to it. So I can remember when I went ABD, I wasn't ready to go to RAND yet. Didn't have my actual diploma yet. So my network I built at RAND included a lot of former U.S. Marines, and one of those Marines got me a job, or got me an introduction, and then I got a job with the Marine Corps as a contract behavioral scientist for a year while I was ABD. It's pretty cool. Got treated as a full scientist and got to do ethnographic work on marine resilience and suicide prevention.
Wow, oh, so interesting. How did you find out about the fellowship?
So I think I finished my coursework and done my midterms. What do you call it? Like my qualifying exams. I'm like, okay, I should probably think now about like jobs and that kind of stuff and where am I going to go. So I sat down, started Googling like internships, summer fellowships, and I just Googled all these ones and I made a huge list I went to my faculty and asked them if they had any recommendation on them. I sort of whittled it down
Mhm.
and tried to sort them all by, sort of match. And in particular, I was like, this RAND one sounds amazing because I don't want to be in the academic world. I don't want to be a professor. And I do want to do important work, and also don't want to do for-profit work. Not that it's wrong. I did not want to do for-profit work. And so it's at that point, you're kind of small little intersection to find what you want. And then I wrote to people. So I actually wrote to Laura Miller, who is a really senior and really important military sociologist. She's probably the leading female, like women in the military, sociologist in America. And I wrote to her and said, hey, here I am. Here's what I want to do. Can I talk to you? And she ended up being my mentor and getting me as a summer associate. So I think not being afraid to reach out to somebody directly. And by the way, I get those emails all the time. I have grad students write to me constantly. Hey, what about this? Give me a recommendation. How do I do that? That kind of stuff. And I'm always open to talking to people. And I think for those of you who are students, I mean, maybe there's a jerk out there, but I think most people are willing to help you, give you some advice or whatever, hook you up or something like that.
Yeah, great. And so Mackenzie, I'm curious to know how you, if it was networking or other things, and then also, have you had the same experience as Bill? Like, do people ping you a lot about opportunities or advice or informational interviews?
They do. And, so networking is, of course, important. I think that there are at least two levels of networking, and both of them are important. So one is, no matter what, you have to reach out and talk to people, but you can reach out and talk to people about specific employment opportunities. And sometimes that looks like, I see you have a job posted and I'm not a good fit for that, but I'd love to talk to you about, X other thing. There's that kind of cold calling and talking to people. But then there's also the reaching out and saying, I want to learn more about what you do. I'm curious about this question that might come up. I think it comes up in your work. Can we talk about it? And then in those conversations saying, who else can I talk to further to learn more about this? And so that kind of networking is purely about talking. Nowhere in there are you saying, it's purely about talking. And I think that both of those are two types of conversations that I have had in my networking journey, and both of those have led to different opportunities too. So it's not that, I think there are a lot of things you can talk about in those networking conversations. In terms of, and then another thing that when I think about people who reach out to me, people reach out to me in both of those ways. So can I talk to you about this specific opportunity, or how I could position myself for other opportunities, or can I talk to you more generally, and are there other people you can introduce me to? And then I also, in terms of, for my own work, one thing that was important for me is I, in addition to doing informational interviews, just going to other kinds of like public events, conferences, webinars, and especially as as the pandemic continues, a lot of conversations and fields have been driven, onto platforms like this, onto Zoom, and so signing up for different listservs and just pursuing things that I've been interested in kind of gets you into rooms with people that you'd never met before. And that, I think, helps continue the process of networking, because you find new people to talk to, new questions that you might be interested in. So talk to people, reach out to people, and go to a lot of public discussions about stuff you think is cool.
Yeah, that's great advice. You're right. I think the pandemic has really pushed a lot of this stuff to forums that are more accessible in ways. Of course, we all miss being able to talk to someone outside a conference in the hallway while we're having coffee. But the fact that you can now attend a big meeting every week if you want to is tremendous. And making yourself visible and making contact with people, I think, is super important. And one thing you guys have all said, and I think we heard it too from the other folks, is that it's important not to be afraid to contact people, right? you just have to do it. You know, Sean, you talked to a state Supreme Court justice, and Bill, you talked to, you know, the most important person in the area that you wanted to do. You I feel maybe you guys can address this a little bit. I feel like as academics, when we got our training in academia, we were taught to be a little bit afraid to talk to people. You know, you don't want to waste their time. You have a question about this, you're not going to go send Noam Chomsky an email because he's way too important and busy to talk to you. And in industry, it's just not like that. You know, you can reach out to people, they'll respond to you or not, but you don't feel bad about it, and you don't get a black mark against you for just reaching out and talking to people. So do you guys all feel that way? And have you had that experience of just like reaching out and seeing what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an important part of what you mentioned. People can get back to you or not, and that's okay. Like it's okay. You know, we're all just, there are people, you're a person, they might not get back to you. So write them again. You know, it's okay. So yes, I've experienced that.
That's great. Bill, do you feel that's the same way? Well, you did it, obviously. It worked for you. Sean, what about you? How much courage did it take to walk up to that state Supreme Court justice and say hi?
So I didn't know who she was. Everybody
Oh.
else in the room knew who she was because they were all lawyers and they had probably all argued cases in front of her, but I didn't know who she was. So that probably worked in my favor. So I wasn't really, she's a very small woman. So she's very unintimidating and she's very sweet and nice. So like, I didn't feel intimidated in that sense. But to echo Mackenzie's point, I definitely did, after I graduated, I kept a spreadsheet of every job I ever applied to, and I probably applied at 20 jobs in a few months, and I got just even a response from 3.
Mm-hmm.
I got 1 interview, and that was the job that I got. So to echo Mackenzie's point, sometimes like you can hit people up and sometimes they get back to you and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. And it's hard to not take that personally, but that's just like a reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I think it's an important lesson for people to learn coming out of academia. On that topic, this is not specific to our area of nonprofit, but what do you think is the biggest difference for you between the academic environment and the industry? I'm calling it industry, even though it's nonprofit. Like, what stands out to you as the biggest difference that you had to learn when you were making that transition? Maybe Sean, you could start, and we'll go around again.
The first thing that comes to mind is like, especially as like a linguist, is that the audience is different. So I've been working on a white paper, and the audience for the white paper is legislatures. It's a white paper on how the bad design and bad language of ballot envelopes makes it like ripe for people to forget to sign. And so I came at that from a very academic point of view. I mean, I haven't even done that much academic writing, but it's really the only type of writing I know. And so I came at it from that point of view. And the director of Center for Civic Design, Whitney Quisenberry, who is brilliant, we had a lot of long conversations about what the effect of using certain like styles of writing is. So trying to use, and especially because the paper is about plain language, it was kind of hypocritical for me to not use plain language to talk about why plain language is so important. So that was a huge kind of shift, and I'm still learning how, like, even though I try to walk the walk and talk the talk when it comes to plain language, the academic side just kind of spills out sometimes because that's how I was trained. But I think finding like people that you really respect, there's somebody, maybe probably a lot of you know, somebody named Ginny Reddish. She's a very influential plain language and document design and UX person. Her full name is Janice Reddish, but she goes by Ginny, G-I-N-N-Y, I think. And she really does walk the walk. And when you read her papers, it makes it really clear that she really does like live and breathe plain language. So I think that was really helpful for me to just like find people to like model myself after, in a sense.
What was the biggest difference What's the biggest difference for you?
To me?
Oh, sorry, I think I got cut off there. Yes, Bill, sorry, yes.
Sure.
So
So I
thinking
think,
about your past in academia.
like Sean said, there's a big translation, I think, or shift for audience. So my audience is public policy makers. So it's senior officers in the military. It's general officers. It's combatant command commanders and their staffs. It's senior executive staff within the U.S. government. It's senior people at the State Department. So people in the intelligence community. I have to be able to go to them and give them insight into the possible choices they could make. I have to help them understand if you pull different public policy levers, what is likely to happen, which leads to a second part because they don't want to know about meth. I mean, they want to know that there's rigor, but they don't want to know how sausage is made. They don't want to hear like some crazy, academic genre of like, like introduction literature. Like that's just crazy to them, right? They want to know, what should I do? Why should I do it? And what are the trade-offs? And can I trust you? A second part of that, I think part of that trust, that ethos issue is that I don't set priorities. My job is not to decide what we ought to do. I can, as a scientist, my job is to help, and my team, and by the way, it's never me. I work in truly interdisciplinary teams of people. Everything is a group effort, which helps produce more rigor, I think, by the way, because we have many, many people working together who have very different kinds of methodological and domain knowledge expertise that intersect. And that is, we can tell people what we think is likely to happen and why, and our relative certainty. But I don't set priorities of government. I don't set values. I don't set U.S. A policy, and that there's a kind of humility, I think, in understanding that I am not. If I want to do that, I should run for office. And then the last part of that, then for me, is all that being said, I also have values, and so I have no problem helping, say, the U.S. military. I don't want to work for Homeland Security. And I don't want to do work as a whole. I mean, maybe there would be something I would do. There's a range of activities for Homeland Security I don't want to do. And I'm lucky that I can pick and choose. But that's that's a really hard thing to navigate, is this idea that like in business or in, the public policy world, what do you do when you're asked to do work that you think might be misapplied? Or in my, by the way, I don't know, my criteria is like, look, I don't want to ever manufacture guns because guns are meant to kill. I know that a Louisville Slugger could be misused, but Louisville Sluggers are meant for baseball, so I'm okay with that. That's my like metaphor for how to pick these things. Over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I was thinking about my own experience in my company doing naming. We've been approached a couple of times by tobacco companies to name cigarettes, and we've just turned that down. Like, nope, we'll do a lot of things, but that's part of the line. And we have a very short list of industries that we absolutely would not work for, and that's one of them. So that just speaks to, again, in industry, you do get a little bit of the ability to pick and choose where you're going to work if you're able to. So Mackenzie, finally for you, I'm curious, as Bill was saying, he works on a team. Do you work on a team as well? Do you often do that, or do you work by yourself?
Both. In this exact moment, I am leading a couple of different teams, and that's the kind of consulting service that I'm providing. But I have, in previous roles, worked on teams, and that's something that I think is two things. I enjoy it, and also fitting into a team, sometimes designing a team, working with teams. These are skills that we can cultivate, and something that really matters, I think, in working in this field. And if I can, I want to draw a connection to what Bill was saying in terms of values, because I think this is really important for any kind of employment or engagement with the nonprofit sector. So these are organizations and institutions that have values, and we are people, we have values too. And I think in looking for where you want to be in this field, it's important to seek out either seek out that alignment, or if the alignment isn't there, figure out how are you going to deal with that and deal with what that looks like every day. And there are a lot of different, and there are also a lot of different types of nonprofit organizations. And when I say types, I mean anything from like their tax and reporting structure and like legal requirements to even how it is that they, if we think of nonprofits as something that serve, like what do they serve? So do they do research? Do they do direct service? Are they about fundraising? These are, there isn't a uniform kind of this type of organization. And so in looking, if this is a sector that someone wants to be a part of, just knowing that, understanding that, and looking for that alignment, I think is important, and frankly can save you a lot of heartache and stress at other points in your journey too. And then I also want to connect to this larger point of what the difference, or what was different when I kind of stepped into this field. And two things were really important. So one, knowing what it is that they're asking you for, like when someone comes to you, knowing you're an academic or a former academic, they might ask you questions like, what should my priorities be? Or should I do X or Y? And is that really something that you want to answer for them? You can, knowing, being able to spot the difference between what people are asking you for and what you can reasonably provide them, so you can help them understand trade-offs. You can give them a sense of the wider history or story behind something. There are different ways that you can answer people's questions. And some of the way that I think about that is asking, what service am I here to provide? If this is a labor market, what service am I providing? Am I looking up stuff for you? Am I managing a project for you? Am I a writer? Am I reviewing somebody else's writing? Am I, and so I think that was a big difference. I think as an academic, I was am, trained to go really deep on any question you ask me. And, I can still do that, don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily what I'm being asked for on a day-to-day. And so what service am I here to provide is something that I ask myself a lot, and had to learn how to ask myself.
Yeah, it sounds like, especially for nonprofit, there's sort of two layers to it, right? There's the desire to want to work for a company that serves, as you were saying, but then there's also layered on top of that, well, what area do you want to serve in? Sean has chosen sort of law and public policy mixed together, whereas somebody might choose a different way to go depending on what that company might do. So let's stay with you for a second, Mackenzie. This is a great transition to some of the more practical advice. So if somebody really wants to work at a nonprofit, what kind of advice, practical advice, would you give them? Like, where do you look? Do you just Google for jobs, or do you look on LinkedIn? Are there keywords that are really important to help you find opportunities that are out there? Obviously there's networking, but if you're just getting started, maybe what are the top 3 things that you would do?
I think that you can in fact Google like nonprofit jobs. You can also, but I think even before you get there, I would say why do you want to work at a nonprofit? And what I would be looking for in that why is there a specific like issue or set of issues that you are interested in? And if that's the case, then so if you are interested in, let's stick with what's top of mind for me. If you're interested, I want to work on a nonprofit that's focused on policing reform. Well, then that is that's a more definable space, and you can find roles that are in that space. Or if you want to be maybe you're not interested in a particular issue, but you're interested in fundraising. I want to be a fundraiser. So then your job search is about looking for jobs in development and development offices. And so And so that's kind of one way to narrow the bounds of what you're looking for. So the first question I would ask is why? And then, for anyone who is interested in, who wants to specifically do communications or marketing work for nonprofit organizations, and I say that because that's the space that I know the best, then there are, I think, a big way that employment opportunities get circulated are through different listservs. So one of them is called RADCOMs, which stands for Radical Communicators. And so that's a listserv of nonprofits and circulating jobs that are about communications for like this kind of sector. So that's I think one way you can kind of get a feel for what kinds of opportunities are circulating. And I'll put the name of the listserv in the chat.
Great. Alex has also mentioned idealist.org, which is a listserv for nonprofit jobs and orgs. And yeah, there it is. Now we have the link. I know that people have often recommended usajobs.gov for government jobs. Bill, is that like the right place to go? Are there others besides that, or is that it?
I think actually LinkedIn can also be good. Glassdoor can be good, but definitely I would use the jobs.gov.
Okay. And Sean, any others to add to that? Were there things that you found useful? You said you had this spreadsheet of all these jobs. How did you find all those jobs that you applied to? Was it networking, Google searching, LinkedIn, all of the above?
Well, a lot of those that were mentioned, I definitely use like LinkedIn. What else? Indeed. I set up like an alert so you can like when new jobs come up with certain keywords, then you can have them emailed to you. Mm-hmm. Besides that, I think, yeah, I Googled a lot. Yeah, beside that, I don't think anything else.
Okay. And I know that this is something that we hear all the time. Most of the jobs that we all have don't have linguist in the title, right? Nobody is hiring linguists for what we do, although linguistics is a core part of what we all do. So what are the other words that you would look for? Obviously language, right? Like if it says something about language, or for Mackenzie's area, it would be like marketing or branding, or maybe copy or discourse analysis. Even might be discourse analysis, I'm not sure. So can you guys think of other words that might be specific when people are looking? So they're typing into Google and they're going nonprofit, job, law. What comes next? What do you do to narrow that down?
I think there are a lot of jobs that are looking for, a lot of institutions are looking for researchers.
Mm.
They're looking for different level researchers. They may specify
and analysts.
Or unless they often specify qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method. And so while most of those jobs, they're used to sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists. That's the three disciplines they're used to recruiting from for these jobs. But if you're a linguistic anthropologist, you're an anthropologist.
Mm-hmm.
If you have sociolinguistics and ethnography training, that's close enough, right? So I think it's possible to translate and represent the skills and the methods that we learn. Also methodology, right? Because like having method skills and domain knowledge is important. Being able to design a research study and to do methodological coherence in research activities, that is a non-trivial skill and important as well. And so being able to represent that in your work, I think, is important.
Cool. Sean, other thoughts?
I definitely sympathize with people conflating like being a polyglot with being a linguist, because like even within my family, they're just like, oh, how many languages do you speak? So yeah, I definitely ran into that problem. Definitely research. I think that's how I found my job. I started to try to like pick up other skills after I graduated, or even toward the end of my, before I graduated, I tried to learn some programming. That didn't really pan out for me. I became interested in UX a little bit. So I started reading a little bit more about UX, and I found that it was kind of compatible with what I valued in my graduate career, like doing research and like speaking to people and understanding people. I will say that I think, especially during like a pandemic, when most people, at least when the job starts, will start remotely, you should turn location off maybe. A lot of times, like you'll put like your location and you really like narrow your job search. So maybe just like not putting a location, and sometimes it'll be like based in Seattle when you're in New York, but it'll be entirely remote and the filter doesn't catch that. And then also analyst, I definitely used that as a search term too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's all really good.
Laurel, can I
Yeah.
give one more sort of job thing?
Oh, absolutely.
So when I tell my students to get ready for the job market, I tell them more than anything else, having high quality method skills and being able to articulate that plausibly. I can do, because like, look, when you hire somebody, like no one wants to, it's going to be hard for you to find someone else to hire you because you care about like sustainable food sources. That's just not what someone wants to hire you for. But they want to hire you to do mixed method quiz analysis, to do data visualizations. This is a lot of things. It's like filling a roster slot on like a baseball roster. So the more skills you have, then you can sort of give evidence that like, to coursework, I have like a portfolio, I did a publication on this kind of stuff. That's valuable. The second thing, and this is hard because we have interests, we have things we passionately care about. What I've seen is that like my dissertation was on how U.S. Marine Corps officer acculturation linguistically affects their political representation and their interactions with Congress. It was really easy for people to see how my work would translate to other public policy issues. I've had friends that did research that was very important to them and they loved and cared about, but it looked, it did not translate outside of the academic work. It looked like, and I want to be careful. I heard the word though. I've heard people say, I don't want to hire someone who's doing me search. And I want to be careful about that because we have passionate, feelings and values. And this research, we can do things that don't directly translate to other areas and see how they add to human knowledge and do bear fruit. But if you want to get hired for a nonprofit that wants to hire you to do X, Y, and Z, they may not see that. So that's an important consideration. Over.
That's great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
To add. I just in thinking about how it's a whole other kind of study to think about how the different types of positions that are available get framed and presented. And so I think a lot of many organizations also in the nonprofit sector, like they are looking for researchers, they're looking for analysts, and sometimes those positions are like, to Bill and Sean's point, like looking for positions that say like research analyst, mixed methods, research analyst, that's important too. There are also organizations that have borrowed the organizational structure of like consulting organizations. And so you'll see positions that are offered in this associate, senior associate, principal, different types of program officers kind of framework too. And so those are all different types of positions that you could be looking for. And so, and of course, there's also like the piece of the sector that is nonprofit consulting and not just borrowing the organizational structure of consulting firms. So that's other positions to be on the lookout for too.
That's great. And this leads into something that I think people would love to know, given that a lot of the folks who are attending today are students, they're still working through their degree program, whatever that is. Do you have specific recommendations for coursework that they should take to give them these skills? So obviously, whatever kind of courses will give you some research opportunities or analytics or statistics or things like that. Are there other courses, obviously dependent on what your interest is? So if you were really interested in law, it might be good to take some courses that will give you a grounding in that. But are there other sort of interest courses that you would recommend people take while they're still working on their degrees? Anybody can go.
Yeah, so I would say data visualizations. If you can learn to do Tableau or some other way of representing data usefully, that's incredibly important skill and really would make you stand out in a crowd. Another one is coding skills. If you can learn Python or R, Although my general sense is that R is more for the person that does their own ad hoc mad scientist work on their laptop. Python is more amenable to enterprise level sort of, but that's my best sense. But if you can do web scraping with Python, if you can build simple machine learning kind of models, if you can handle data at scale using Python or other coding means, that's important. So I think anything that shows that you can handle data in a world where we are getting more and more data available to us is going to help you differentiate yourself.
Yeah, that's great.
And I would say, even if you, I completely agree. Those are the things that I also would name. And for anyone who might be having palpitations about, oh, MG, I have to learn how to use R. Like, I tried it once, it didn't really go well. That's okay. What another thing that is important is being able to, this gets back to the question about teamwork. Can you work with someone who is the R, if we're using R as an example, the R expert here? Can you work with that person? Can you work with the output of the R script that someone else on your team is creating? And that is a skill that you pick up in these kinds of classes and coursework as well. So it's not that you need to be the best programmer out there, but can you work with, can you work on the team? That also really matters, and is something that one, you can speak to in interviews, and frankly, that's a question that people are looking for, not just the person who's the expert, but the person who can work with the expert. And someone will ask you, it's okay in an interview to say, I'm not, an expert at this, but I'm familiar with applying it in these ways. That's a skill too.
Mm-hmm. Sean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Mackenzie's point about like, I had that anxiety about learning coding, like, oh, I don't know. I have spent hours and hours on this Code Academy course and I still don't know anything about it. But I do. I know more than I did before I started. And that's probably, hasn't yet, but I imagine that will come in use one day.
Mm-hmm.
And besides courses, I think, like for me, that plain language conference I went to was really, that really like started it for me, if there was like a moment where it started. And if you're still in grad school, there's a good chance that there are a lot of things going on your campus that maybe they are at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and you don't want to go, but you might want to think about like going, like saying yes to as many of those types of opportunities, because once you leave grad school, then you really don't, you're not on the same email lists anymore, and you're just not gonna have those, like, this was back before the pandemic, but like when you hear things in the hallway and stuff, and oh, there's a conference, you see a flyer for something. Those are, I think, besides coursework, I think saying yes to those types of things are usually good. And then also asking for like money from your program if you can. Like there were cases where I went to a conference in Austria and the program funded that, and I wouldn't have gone if it weren't for that. So seeing like what funding is available if you are in that type of grad program, if they'll pay for you to go to a conference, then definitely go.
Yeah, you have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to offer to you. You got to ask.
Exactly.
One other thing, and it may not be a course, but the ability, gaining and demonstrating leadership expertise. So I'm a principal investigator. I for most projects, I know from $500,000 to $2.5 million budgets. I have teams of people that work for me, and while I'm a senior person, I started off as a task leader, then be a co-PI, and then finally a PI. So if you can show through other experience, through demonstrated work somewhere in your academic career, that you are capable of leading teams of people to collaborate productively, that's pretty powerful for some people that want to hire.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And I would add one more thing to that, which is if you have the opportunity to take a course that helps you with your presentation skills, do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, both standing up in front of a group of people and learning how to talk, if you don't do that already, if you don't have the teaching experience, but also putting together a really kick-ass PowerPoint presentation, because you need to know how to do that. You really do, to take all this data, to distill the points to it, to put it into a presentation that is pleasing to look at, that people can understand, and that is likely going to be handed around without you there to explain it. And that's something that took me a long time to learn. We're sort of used to voicing over our work all the time as we're presenting, like in this kind of format where you're giving a paper and you're talking through slides. You really, really have to figure out how to get it into a format where people can read it and understand it and not come away confused. And I know a lot of universities have classes, but even you can take classes like that on LinkedIn, and there's other free places that will teach you how to do it. It's not easy. Like PowerPoint skills are harder than you think they are. And having that in your pocket is fantastic. We have a question from the audience here, which is, do you usually need to submit writing samples for the kinds of jobs that you all have on this panel? Is it too late if during our academic career we haven't done much research that would be applicable or interesting to employers? Like if we have had relevant coursework or believe we have skills, but none of the research writing we have produced is appealing outside of theoretical linguistics. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so like I had to do a job talk where I presented research in a way that was of interest, that showed both my academic and scientific chops, but also showed I could translate and talk to a policy audience, which is not easy. And part of my application was also a writing sample. I think the writing sample, you know, it doesn't have to be like about the place you're applying to. It's because you can see, hey, someone can write rigorously, they can do good work. But I guess like it's probably going to be hard if you've done like something like I don't know, like a humanities piece or fiction, how to translate well. But I think it has to be the exact subject area you're applying for.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to be the exact subject area, and it can also be you can use the things that you have written and maybe reformulate them. So, for example, like, yeah, I wrote a dissertation. I do not send that, never have sent that whole thing to someone, but I have sent people a summary of turned one of my chapters into a one-pager, right? So that's a writing sample. I wrote it, giving you a sample, voila. But in all seriousness, it doesn't have to be the exact subject matter. You can, and when people are asking you for a writing sample, you can create different types of, you likely have created different types of products, like written products across your career. And so, and across your academic career. And so I think maybe thinking a little more expansively about what have I written, what different formats are out there. And honestly, if you are unsure about, what you want to send things of different types. And you can send them two things too.
That's great. Sean, anything else on that topic?
Yeah, I thought it was funny, like the idea of setting like a 100-page dissertation is quite a flex, and no one's going to read it anyway. So that's pretty good advice. For me, so part of what we do at Center for Civic Design is we design forms, like more accessible forms, and we take insights from good design and plain language to make forms easier to read and harder to mess up, basically. And when I was interning at this Office for Justice Initiatives, my boss, who was a law clerk, basically said, we're working on this form. If you want to take a stab at it, go ahead. We probably won't use whatever you come up with, just because there's like a very long legal process that you'll be long gone before any of this even gets talked about. But if you want to, go ahead and take a stab at it. And so I did, and I gave it back to him, and we really never talked about it again. And I kind of forgot about it. And when I applied for my job, part of the job description was like looking at forms. And I was like, oh, I did that. And it's definitely better than the original form, but I didn't really I basically kind of jumped into the deep end with form designing, and I knew I was like interested in it, but I didn't really know how to do it. So I just like took a stab at it. So maybe I'm like reframing the question as like, what writings, not what writing sample should you send, but like what should you write? Like maybe if you're interested in blogging, write some blog articles, because that is a skill and that could be really useful, especially at a nonprofit where they're looking for really diverse skill sets. I don't do blog writing, but I wish I did, because there are 7 people at CCD and one of us has to do it. Nobody specializes in that. So things like that, like maybe if you have like this inkling of like, I want to write that type of thing, or like Mackenzie said, like a summary, like that's a really good skill, like being able to summarize something. And people will not only look at like the content of what you wrote in that summary, but also like, oh, that's really great that they can take something that's like several hundred pages and condense it to 1 page.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I always say to people, just write, like keep writing, because you get better at it the more you do it. And the more writing you do, the more writing samples you'll have. And the more different types of writing you do, the more fluent you'll get in them. So you should always be writing something, I think. As we're starting to wrap up, I wanted to ask you guys, because I'm sure this is top of mind question for our students, what are prospects looking like for jobs in nonprofits, given our extremely turbulent times? Any, inklings on that?
I can
I,
go ahead.
Mackenzie, go
you
ahead.
know, there are, I have an inkling. There are lots of different inklings, and I think that uh, different. I think I understand why there is trepidation, but at the same time, you know, there are still opportunities. So I am not a person who thinks and sees that there's a dearth of opportunity and hiring. From where I sit, I see that it's happening and people are creating new roles or looking to fill existing roles. So I see a lot of jobs out there, and in all of the different platforms that we've discussed and the listservs we've discussed, like as I've been sitting here, I've gotten 3 open job opportunities through the RadComs listserv that I mentioned. So on a Sunday, people are saying that there are jobs available. So to answer your question, I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think it will continue just based on the evidence that I kind of see in my inbox.
That's great. Bill, you were going to go.
Yeah, so I would say there are still opportunities available, although I think it's gone down. I mean, I've definitely seen, I know that most of the FFRDCs, the federally funded research development corporations, the large, sort of partnership ones in the DC area, I think all of them have shed some labor right now. And I think there's more, I think there is hiring. I think it's very targeted. So, like, well, they hired me. I'm like some kooky guy with a rhetoric degree. Like I have like the dumbest, PhD in the world. I got hired kind of on a flyer. It worked out. I see now people with data skills, sort of like skills that people can absolutely see fill the like affect the bottom line and are going to help them be productive, either pulling in money or effectively meeting their contract obligations. So again, I think that speaks to wanting to make sure there's opportunities. You really want to make sure, one, that you are able to plausibly present yourself as having valuable skills, and 2, really thinking carefully about how you represent yourself so that you're speaking. And I think you might have 8 different CVs. You might really think carefully about crafting every single cover letter, piloting it with people. So contacting people, the last thing you want to do is send a cover letter that signals something that's the wrong thing. You have the best intention, but you didn't use the language and the framing and even the order, the scheme that's going to make sense. So I just think you have to really take your shots very, very carefully, thoughtfully, with a lot of diligence, and make the most of them. Over.
That's great advice. Great advice. Sean, and what about in your sector? What do you think? Public policy, civic design stuff?
So Sutton for Civic Design's bread and butter is elections, so definitely not a boring like field right now. And there, from what I understand, is a lot of funding happening right now. I didn't know any of this going into it. I didn't really know anything about elections before I worked at CCD. So I think that just going back to like networking, that's like probably a good question to ask when you are networking, when you do connect with people. Like what is it like? What is it like compared to a year ago? How much has the pandemic like impacted this? For some fields, the pandemic has like made things better for some fields, right? And it's kind of like a weird irony, but that's just the reality in some cases. And I hate making this point because I think it's so unfair, but I think that like taking unpaid internships is, I mean, I was able to do that. My wife was working while I finished my graduate degree. So I hate like pushing that because I hate that idea of like unpaid internships. I think it's really, it's unfair to put it lightly. But I did it because I was able to do it. So if you can do it, then you should. And if you can't, then I sympathize with how unfair that system is.
Yep, totally agree. Totally agree. So we are just coming up to time. This has been an amazing conversation. You guys have been fantastic, and I thank you so much for your time. I think they're going to shut the room in a second. So this has been recorded, and we are going to be making it available at some point for people outside of the attendees for LSA. The LSA attendees will get to view it, I think, on the LSA website. We've been linking in the chat all the different resources that we have. We've got the career panel tomorrow, and then the mixer, which is on Wednesday. And if some of you are going to attend the mixer, panelists, that is, I'm sure there would be lots of people who would love to talk with you. And I would bet you're going to be getting LinkedIn requests from lots of the folks who attended today. So again, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic, and we are lucky to have you as our panelists.